I was in the middle of unclogging a stubborn drain when my phone buzzed on the counter. Wiping my hands on my overalls, I glanced at the screen. It was Melissa, my wife. Odd, I thought, she rarely called during work hours unless it was urgent. "Hey, babe. Everything okay?" I asked, holding the phone awkwardly with my shoulder. "Bran," she started, her voice unsteady. "I think I left my office keys at home. Can you check?" This wasn't like her. Melissa was always meticulous. "Sure," I said, walking to the kitchen table where she usually left her things. Her keys were right there, but something else caught my eye, a small, glossy business card peeking out from under her planner. I picked it up. "Lux Rendezvous," it read, with a tagline underneath, "Discretion Redefined." The logo of a golden key shimmered in the light. "What is this?" I muttered to myself. "Bran?" Melissa's voice snapped me back. "Did you find them?" "Yeah," I replied, shoving the card back under the planner. "I'll bring them to your office." When I hung up, my mind raced. Lux Rendezvous. It sounded like a fancy hotel or something else. Shaking off the unease, I told myself it was probably nothing. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the last I'd see of that name. I drove to Melissa's office, the keys jingling in my pocket as I tried to focus on the road. But my thoughts kept drifting back to that card. Lux Rendezvous. Why did it sound so clandestine? When I handed her the keys, she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Thanks, love," she said, her smile radiant. "You're a lifesaver." As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. Melissa had been working late more often lately, claiming tight deadlines at the SMM agency. She'd even started taking work trips, a new development for her. At first, I'd chalked it up to her dedication, but now, I wasn't so sure. Back at the house, I decided to Google the name on the card. Lux Rendezvous. The search results left me staring at the screen in disbelief. It was a high-end, experience agency, specializing in curated getaways for couples, or clandestine meetings for those seeking discretion. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the reviews, all glowing with praise for their attention to privacy and detail. This couldn't involve Melissa, could it? I spent the rest of the day in a haze, second-guessing myself. Maybe it was just part of her agency's work. After all, she did marketing for niche clients sometimes. But as much as I tried to rationalize, I couldn't shake the pit forming in my stomach. That night, I brought it up casually during dinner. "Hey, I found an interesting card on the table earlier, Lux Rendezvous. What's that about?" I asked, keeping my tone light as I passed her the salad. Melissa froze for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but enough for me to catch. She recovered quickly, laughing it off. "Oh, that? It's just a potential client. They might want us to handle their social media." "Fancy, huh?" Her explanation seemed plausible enough, but something in her tone felt rehearsed. I didn't press further. Not yet. Later, as she showered, I peeked into her purse. I'd never done something like this before, and it felt wrong, but my instinct screamed at me to look. Among the usual clutter of receipts and makeup, I found a small, folded piece of paper. Written in neat handwriting was an address and a date, 2 days from now. I quickly snapped a picture with my phone and put everything back as I'd found it. When Melissa emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, she was humming softly, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I spent the next 2 days obsessing over that address. It was all I could think about. The handwriting wasn't Melissa's, but that didn't mean anything on its own. I told myself it could be part of her work, some meeting or event. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't rest until I knew for sure. The address was etched into my mind, 1426, Maple Avenue. I looked it up online and found it was a boutique hotel, not just any hotel, but one of those trendy, upscale places with words like intimate and exclusive plastered all over the website. The kind of place where people went to escape prying eyes. On the day in question, Melissa left the house dressed sharply but casually, jeans, a tailored jacket, and heels. "Work thing," she explained, kissing me goodbye. "I'll be home late, don't wait up." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Good luck." As soon as she drove off, I grabbed my keys and followed her at a distance. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but the need to know outweighed the guilt gnawing at me. My heart pounded as I kept her car in sight, weaving through the city until she pulled into the parking lot of the boutique hotel. I parked down the street, trying to steady my breathing. She got out, her phone pressed to her ear as she walked toward the entrance. Then, she stopped, turning to look behind her. I ducked lower in my seat, barely daring to breathe. After a moment, she went inside. The next hour was agony. I sat there, staring at the building, my mind spinning with possibilities. Was she meeting a client? A friend? Or someone else? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I left the car and walked into the hotel, trying to look casual. The lobby was sleek and modern, with dim lighting and a concierge who barely glanced at me as I walked past. I made my way toward the elevators, scanning the directory for anything that might give me a clue. My pulse quickened as I spotted a small plaque near the stairs, "Luxe Rendezvous, Private Suites." The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, my finger hovering over the button for the top floor where the suites were located. But I couldn't bring myself to press it. What if I was wrong? What if this was all in my head? But then again, what if I was right? I stood there for a long moment before stepping out and heading to the concierge desk. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm supposed to meet someone in one of the private suites, but I forgot the number. Can you help me?" The concierge hesitated, her professional smile faltering slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. We can't give out that information. Privacy is one of our top priorities." Of course it was. Defeated, I returned to my car, but I couldn't drive away. I waited, my eyes fixed on the entrance. It was another hour before Melissa emerged, her hair slightly tousled and a soft smile on her lips. She got into her car and drove off, oblivious to my presence. When Melissa got home that night, I pretended everything was normal. I couldn't confront her, not yet. If I was wrong, I'd shatter the trust between us for nothing. But if I was right, I needed proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. "How was your work thing?" I asked as she hung up her coat. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Exhausting. That client was picky, but I think we nailed it. Hopefully, it turns into a long-term contract." Her answer was smooth, practiced, but something about the way she avoided my eyes stuck with me. "That's great," I said, forcing a smile. "You deserve a break. Want me to pour you a glass of wine?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I'm just going to shower and crash. Long day." I watched her disappear down the hall, my stomach churning. She seemed so normal, so composed. Could I have imagined the whole thing? But no, her trip to that hotel wasn't my imagination. I couldn't ignore the truth staring me in the face. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I checked her phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Work emails, a group chat with friends, and a few texts from me. Either she was covering her tracks, or I was losing my mind. That's when I noticed the second app drawer. I'd never paid much attention to her phone setup before, but this was new. Tucked away in a folder was an app one didn't recognize, something called Cloak. I tapped it, but it was locked with a pin. She stepped out of the bathroom just as I set the phone down. "What are you doing?" she asked, toweling her hair. "Just checking the weather," I lied, holding up my phone as if I'd been using it the whole time. She didn't seem suspicious and went about her morning routine. That app stuck in my mind all day. What was she hiding? And why go to such lengths? I decided to dig deeper. If I wanted answers, I'd have to go beyond just watching from the sidelines. The following evening, I installed a small voice recorder in her car. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but the need to know the truth outweighed my moral hesitations. I hid it carefully under the passenger seat, praying she wouldn't find it. The next day, she left for another client meeting. I waited anxiously for her to return, and once she went to bed, I retrieved the recorder and plugged it into my laptop. My heart pounded as I hit play. At first, there was nothing but static and the hum of the engine. Then, a voice, Melissa's. "Don't worry, I'll see you soon. The reservation is confirmed for Friday." A man's voice responded, deep and unfamiliar. "Looking forward to it. Same place?" "Yes," she said, her tone warm and intimate in a way I hadn't heard in years. "I'll bring the same dress." I stopped the recording, my stomach turning. There was no mistaking the implication. This wasn't work. This wasn't innocent. But who was he? And what was this same place they kept mentioning? I spent the rest of the night replaying the conversation in my mind, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to form an unmistakable picture. My wife wasn't just lying to me, she was living a double life. Friday couldn't come soon enough. I needed to know who this man was and what was really going on. Friday arrived, and I felt like I was holding my breath all day. Melissa left the house just after lunch, wearing a flowing dress I hadn't seen in years. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and said, "Don't wait up, I might be home late." My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to smile. "Have a good meeting." As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my keys and followed her. The voice recorder had mentioned a reservation, so I wasn't surprised when she pulled into the parking lot of the same boutique hotel. She stepped out of the car, her phone in hand, and walked inside with a calm confidence that made my stomach churn. This time, I didn't stay in the car. I needed to see for myself. I waited a few minutes before entering the hotel and found a quiet corner near the lobby. Melissa didn't come back down, so I approached the concierge desk, my nerves jangling. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I think I'm meeting someone here, but I forgot the room number. Could you check for Melissa Brendon?" The concierge frowned, typing into the computer. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no one registered under that name." "Maybe it's under someone else's name," I said quickly. "Do you have a suite reserved for, John, maybe?" The concierge shook her head, her polite smile returning. "I'm sorry, but without a reservation number or name on file, I can't assist you." I nodded, thanking her as I stepped away. It was a dead end. Whatever alias Melissa, or the man, was using, it wasn't something I could guess. Frustrated but determined, I walked back outside and waited. For over an hour, I sat in my car, scanning every face that entered or left. Just when I thought I'd leave empty-handed, I saw her. Melissa emerged, her arm linked with a man in a dark suit. He was tall, with slick back hair and an air of confidence that made my blood boil. They were laughing, completely at ease, as they walked toward his car. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture, my hands shaking as I captured the moment. It was all I needed, proof that she wasn't at a work meeting. Melissa came home late that night, her smile as radiant as ever. "Sorry I'm so late," she said, slipping off her shoes. That client was a real handful. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Do all your clients wear suits and take you to boutique hotels?" Her smile froze, and her eyes darted to mine. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the picture. "This. Who is he?" Her face drained of color as she stared at the screen. "Brendon, it's not what it looks like. Then explain it to me. My voice was louder than I intended, and she flinched. Explain why you've been sneaking around, lying to me, and meeting some guy in secret. Go on. I'm all ears. For a moment, she just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "He's a client. That's all." A client? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. That's your story? You expect me to believe you've been spending afternoons at boutique hotels with a client? Brandon, please, she said, stepping closer. You don't understand. No, I don't, I interrupted, stepping back. But I think I'm starting to. And I think you'd better start telling me the truth. She stared at me, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. It's not what you think, she whispered. Please, just let me explain. I crossed my arms, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Then explain, Melissa. Tell me what this really is, because I'm done guessing. She hesitated, wringing her hands like she was trying to conjure the right words. It started a few months ago, she said finally, her voice trembling. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious. My stomach dropped. So you admit it. You've been seeing him. She nodded, her head hanging low. His name is Greg. He's someone I met through work. At first, it was just professional, meetings, networking events, but it became more. More. I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. You mean lying to me, sneaking off to hotels, and God knows what else? That kind of more. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked at me, her face a mix of guilt and desperation. It wasn't about you, Brandon. It wasn't. I felt invisible. Like I was stuck in this routine, and he made me feel alive again. Alive? I spat, anger bubbling to the surface. You felt alive while betraying the family we built. The life we worked for. Is that what you call alive? She reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said, my voice sharp. You don't get to make this about feelings or excuses. You made a choice, Melissa. A choice to destroy everything. I never wanted to hurt you, she sobbed. I swear. Yeah. Well, you did, I said coldly. And now you get to live with it. The next day, I couldn't bring myself to look at her. She stayed in the bedroom, crying quietly, while I made coffee and tried to process everything. My emotions swung between anger, betrayal, and a hollow ache I couldn't shake. I decided I needed answers, not just from Melissa, but from Greg. If she wasn't going to tell me the whole truth, maybe he would. I still had the photo I'd taken at the hotel, so I started digging. A reverse image search led me to a LinkedIn profile, Greg Winters, managing partner at a high-end consulting firm. His profile showed a man who seemed to have it all, wealth, status, a family of his own. The hypocrisy made me sick. But then I noticed something odd. His posts, photos, and connections painted a picture of someone very public, very open, nothing to suggest the secretive behavior I'd witnessed. And the deeper I looked, the stranger it got. Greg seemed too polished. Almost like a facade. The realization hit me like a freight train. Melissa wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Something about Greg didn't add up. That evening, I confronted Melissa again. Why him? I demanded. Why Greg? She looked up from the couch, her face pale. I don't know, she whispered. He was charming. Persistent. Persistent? I said, narrowing my eyes. Or manipulative. Her silence was answer enough. I looked him up, I continued. Greg Winters. Did you know he has a wife? Kids? Did you think about them while you were feeling alive? Her lip trembled, but she didn't reply. Or maybe, I added, leaning closer, Greg isn't who you think he is. Her eyes snapped to mine, confusion flickering across her face. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the bombshell I was about to drop. Greg isn't just some guy you met through work. He's a fraud. Everything about him, the charm, the persistence, it's an act. Did you even know he's been using you? What are you talking about? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I pulled out my phone, showing her the LinkedIn profile alongside a news article I'd found. Greg Winters is being investigated for corporate espionage. He's used relationships like this to gain access to sensitive information. Did you give him anything, Melissa? Any passwords, files, data from your agency? Her face went white as the realization hit her. Oh my God, she whispered. I thought he cared. He cared about what you could give him, I said, my voice hard. And now, thanks to you, we might be caught in the middle of whatever game he's playing. For the first time, her tears seemed genuine. Brendon, I swear, I didn't know. It doesn't matter, I said, my anger simmering just below the surface. Because you chose to trust him over me. And now we're both paying the price. Melissa was in full panic mode. She paced the living room, her hands clutching her hair. Brendon, what do we do? If he's using me, us, for something illegal. I snapped. You mean you? Don't try to drag me into this. You're the one who let him in. Her face crumpled, but I didn't have room for pity. Not now. I needed to think clearly, to figure out how to handle this mess. I grabbed my laptop and started compiling every bit of evidence I had, the photo, the voice recording, the emails, even the article about Greg. We go to the police, I said finally, my voice steady. We show them everything. Melissa froze. The police? No, Brendon, please. I'll lose everything, my job, my reputation. They'll think I was complicit. And how do you think I feel? I shot back. You're worried about your job. Your reputation. Melissa, you destroyed our marriage and jeopardized everything we built because you couldn't see through his lies. Do you honestly think you get to walk away unscathed? Her lip trembled, but she didn't argue. She sat down on the couch, her face buried in her hands. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That night, Melissa finally told me everything, or at least, everything she claimed to know. It started innocently, she said. Greg had approached her at a networking event, charming and complimentary. He offered her advice on growing her agency's client base and eventually suggested working together on a special project. At first, it really was just work, she insisted. But then he started showing interest in me. Personally. And you didn't think to question that? I asked, my voice cold. I was flattered, she admitted, her eyes wet with tears. He made me feel important. Wanted. Important enough to risk everything? I pressed. Did he ask for anything specific? Documents? Contacts? She hesitated, her silence telling me more than words ever could. There was one time, she admitted. He said he needed a proposal template for a client pitch. I sent it to him. But that's all, nothing sensitive. My heart sank. Even if she believed that was harmless, it wasn't. If Greg was involved in corporate espionage, even the smallest details could be leveraged for something bigger. I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of her choices crushing down on me. Do you realize what you've done? This isn't just about us anymore. You've put your career, and possibly our safety, on the line. The next morning, I took everything to the police. Melissa didn't come with me, she was too scared. I met with a detective who listened carefully as I laid out the evidence. This Greg Winters, I said, pointing to the article on my laptop. He's been using my wife to gain access to confidential information. I don't know how far it goes, but I thought you should know. The detective nodded, jotting down notes. You did the right thing coming here, Mr. Brendon. We've been tracking Mr. Winters for a while. Your wife isn't his first target. Hearing that made my stomach churn. I had no love left for Melissa, but imagining her as just another pawn in Greg's game made my blood boil. What happens now? I asked. We'll investigate further, the detective said. But I suggest you be careful. People like Greg don't like loose ends. I left the station with a mix of relief and unease. The authorities were involved now, but the situation felt far from resolved. The next few days were tense. Melissa stayed home, too paranoid to go to work. I avoided her as much as possible, keeping my focus on the kids and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. Then, late one night, I saw headlights pull into our driveway. My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door and stepped outside. Greg stood there, leaning casually against his car, his expression smug. We need to talk, he said, his voice smooth as silk. There's nothing to talk about, I said, gripping the bat tightly. Oh, but there is, he said, stepping closer. You see, I know you've been busy. Going to the police, digging into my affairs, not very smart, Brendon. I took a step forward, anger flaring. Get off my property, or I'll. You'll what? He interrupted, his tone mocking. Do you really think you're in control here? Before I could respond, he smiled coldly. You don't want to make an enemy of me. Walk away, Brendon. Take your wife, your kids, and move on. Forget about me. That's the only warning you'll get. I stood there, gripping the bat, my pulse pounding in my ears as Greg's smug grin dared me to act. Every instinct screamed at me to swing, to wipe that smirk off his face, but I knew that was exactly what he wanted. I lowered the bat slightly, keeping my eyes locked on his. Get in your car, I said, my voice low and steady. This is your last chance to leave. Greg chuckled, taking a slow step backward. Suit yourself, Brendon. But remember, you brought this on yourself. As he got into his car and drove off, I stood in the driveway, my mind racing. Greg had made his move, but he didn't know everything. He didn't know I'd already given his name to the police. And he certainly didn't know about the small GPS tracker I'd slipped onto his car while we were talking. Greg's smug grin haunted me as I stood in the driveway, gripping the bat and trying to calm the storm raging inside me. He thought he had control, that I was just some weak, fumbling guy he could intimidate. But he underestimated me. As soon as he drove off, I walked back inside, my hands shaking. Melissa was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone, but she looked up when I entered. What happened? She asked, her voice quivering. He was here, I said bluntly. Her face went pale. Greg? What did he want? To scare me, I said. But it's not going to work. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't have time for her guilt or fear. I had a plan. Greg thought he was clever, but I'd planted a GPS tracker under his car when he wasn't looking. It was risky, but I needed leverage. I went to my laptop and opened the tracking software. Sure enough, his car was heading into the city. I watched as the little dot on the map stopped at what looked like an upscale townhouse. I quickly cross-referenced the address. It was listed as one of his properties. I didn't waste time. I called the detective handling Greg's case and gave him the new address. He just left my house, I said. He was trying to intimidate me. This is where he went. The detective's voice was calm but firm. We'll look into it. Thank you for letting us know. Hanging up, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Greg was confident he could control the narrative, but he didn't know how close the police were to catching him. Melissa hovered near the doorway. What happens now? She asked. What happens now, I said, is that we stay out of his way and let the professionals handle it. But you need to be honest with them, Melissa. About everything. Her lip trembled, but she nodded. I will. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Greg's visit, his arrogant smirk, his veiled threats. I knew men like him, they thrived on fear, manipulation, and the belief that they were untouchable. But this time, he'd miscalculated. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was the detective. We're moving in on Greg, he said. Your tracker helped us confirm his movements. We have enough to bring him in. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I still had to face the fallout of Melissa's betrayal, the mess Greg had dragged us into, and the long road ahead. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control. The detective's next words brought me back to reality. I don't want to alarm you, but men like Greg don't go quietly. Be careful, Brendon. Until we have him in custody, don't let your guard down. I won't, I said, hanging up. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew the endgame was near. Greg had played his hand, but now it was my turn. And I wasn't going to fold. The next day, I met with the detective again, this time armed with new evidence. The tracker showed Greg's movements, his office, a couple of luxury restaurants, and a house in an affluent neighborhood. I handed over everything. This is good, the detective said, nodding at the printouts. We'll use this to build our case. But be careful. If he knows you're tracking him, things could escalate. Back at home, Melissa was a wreck. She paced the living room, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. Brendon, what if he comes back? What if he does something to the kids? Her panic grated on me, but I kept my voice calm. The police are handling it. But you need to tell them everything, every interaction, every email, every meeting. If you hold anything back, it could come back to haunt you. She nodded, her tear-streaked face a mixture of guilt and fear. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, she said. But her words felt hollow. The damage was done. A week later, the police called me with an update. We've connected Greg to several cases of corporate theft, the detective said. Your evidence helped solidify our investigation. We're moving in soon, but we need you and your family to lay low. I relayed the message to Melissa, who agreed to stay with her sister for a while. I didn't go with her, I couldn't. Every glance, every word between us felt like a reminder of her betrayal. As I packed her bags, she stood in the doorway, her voice trembling. Brendon, I'm so sorry. For everything. If I could take it back, I would. I looked at her, feeling the weight of everything we'd lost. I know you're sorry, Melissa. But sorry doesn't change what happened. A few days later, it all came to a head. The police raided Greg's office and home, arresting him on multiple charges, including fraud and corporate espionage. News of his crime spread quickly, and Melissa's agency was cleared of wrongdoing, but her name was tarnished. Clients pulled their accounts, and she lost her job. When she called to tell me, her voice was small and defeated. It's over, she said. Greg's in custody. They said I won't face charges, but I've lost everything. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to remind her that she wasn't alone. But another part, the part still raw and angry, felt like this was her penance. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. Melissa stayed with her sister, and we kept communication minimal, only discussing the kids. I started therapy to work through my anger and grief, and slowly, I began to find clarity. One day, Melissa asked to meet. I know I don't deserve another chance, she said, her voice trembling. But I want to try. For us. For the kids. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. I don't know if I can, Melissa. Trust isn't something you just rebuild overnight. And I'm not sure it's something we'll ever have again. Months passed, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Melissa and I remained separated, co-parenting as best we could. She found a new job, one far removed from the world that had entangled her with Greg. As for me, I began to see the cracks in our marriage not as an excuse for her actions, but as a warning, a lesson to pay attention to the small moments, to never take trust for granted. I don't know what the future holds for us. Maybe someday, we'll find a way back to each other. Or maybe we won't. But for now, I'm focusing on what matters most, my kids, my sanity, and the hope that, one day, I'll feel whole again.